How the economy machine works in 30 minutes. The economy works like a simple machine, but many people don't understand it, or they don't agree on how it works, and this has led to a lot of needless economy suffering. I feel a deep sense of responsibility to share my simple but practical economic template. Though it's conventional, it's helped me to anticipate to sidestep global financial crisis, and it has worked well for me for over 30 years. Let's begin. Though the economy might seem complex, it works in a simple mechanical way. It's made of a few simple parts and a lot of simple transactions that are repeated over and over a zillion times. All of the above are driven by human nature, and they create three main forces and drive the economy. Number one, productivity growth. Number two, the short-term debt cycle. And number three, the long-term debt cycle. Let's look at these three processes and how linked on top of each other create a good template for tracking economic movements and figuring out what's happening now. Let's start with part of the economy transactions. An economy is simple sum of transactions make it up. And a transaction is a very simple thing. You make transactions all the time. Every time you buy something, you create a transaction. Each transaction consists of a buyer exchanging money or credit with the seller for goods, services, or financial assets. Credit spent just like money. So adding together the money spent, the amount credit spent, equals the total spent. The total amount spent drives the economy. If you divide the amount spent by the quantity sold, you get the price. And that's it. That's your transaction. It's a building block economy machine. All cycles, all process and economy driven by transactions. So if we don't understand transaction, we can understand the whole economy. Our market consists of all the buyers, all the sellers making transactions for the same thing. For example, there is a wheat market, a car market, a stock market. A market is a million of things. An economy consists of all of the transactions in all of its market. If you add up the total spending, total quantity sold, and all of the markets, we have everything you need to understand the economy. It's just that simple. People, businesses, and banks and governments all engage in transactions via just described, exchanging money and credit for goods, services, and financial assets. The biggest buyer seller is government, which consists of two important parts. A central government collects taxes which spends money, and a central bank, which is different from buyer sellers because it controls the amount of money or credit in the economy. It does this by influencing interest and printing new money. For these reasons, as well as the central bank's important player of credit. I want you to put credit. Credit is the most important part of the economy and probably least understood. It's the most important part of the biggest and most valuable part. Just like buyers and sellers go to the market to make transactions, so the lenders and borrowers. Lenders usually want to make their money into more money, and borrowers usually want to buy something they can afford, like a house or a car, or they want to invest in something like starting business. Credit can help both lenders and borrowers get what they want. Borrowers promise to repay the amount borrowed, called principal, plus additional one called interest. When interest rates are high, this rates to borrow becomes expensive. When interest rates are low, borrowing increases because it's cheaper. When borrowers promise to repay and lenders believe them, credit is created. Any two people can agree to credit out of thin air. That's simple enough, but credit is tricky because it has different name. As soon as credit is created, it immediately into debt. Debt is both an asset to the lender and a liability to the borrower. In the future, when the borrower will pay the loan plus interest, the asset and liability disappear, and the transaction is zero. So why is credit is so important? Because when a borrower receives credit, he is able to increase his spending. And remember, spending drives the economy. This is because one person's spending is another person's income. Think about it. Every dollar you spend, someone else earns, and every dollar you earn, someone else spends. So when you spend more, someone else earns more. When someone's income rises, it makes lenders more willing to lend him money because now he's more worthy of credit. A credit-worthy borrower, he has two things: ability to repay and collateral. Having a lot of income relation instead gives an ability to repay. And even if he can repay, he has a borrower asset to use as collateral that can be sold. This makes lenders feel comfortable lending him money. So increases the income allows increases borrowing, which allows increases spending. And since one person's spending is another person's income, this leads to more increases borrow and so on. This self-enforcing pattern, this economic growth, and is why it has cycles. In a transaction, you have to give something in order to get something, and how much get depends how much you produce. Over time, we learn and not accumulate knowledge relates to your living standard. We call this productivity growth. Those who invented on hard working raise their productivity in living standard fast, and those who complain raise. But that isn't necessarily true of the short run. Productivity matters most in the long run, but credit matters most in the short run. This is because productivity growth doesn't fluctuate much, so it's not a derived economy swings. That is because the large consume more will produce more required, and its process consume less will produce what you have to pay back. That swings come in two big cycles. One takes about 5 to 8 years, the other takes about 75 to 100 years. While most people fear the swings, they typically don't see the cycles because they see them close, day by day, week by week. And this chapter, we're going to step back and look at these three forces and how they interact and make up borrower's experience. As mentioned, swings around a lot due to how much innovation, hard work there is. They are primarily there is how much. Let's for a second imagine an economy without credit. In this second economy, the only way increases my spending is the increases my income, which quality will be productive and do more work. Increases productivity is the only way grow. Since my spending is another person's income, the economy grows every time anyone else. Productive, if you follow the transaction and apply this vicious progression, like productivity growth line. But because with borrow, we have cycles. This is due to any laws or regulation. It's due to human nature and the way credit works. Think about borrowing and simply a way pulling spend forward. In order to buy something you can afford, you need to spend more you make. To do this, you essentially need to borrow from your future self. In doing so, you create the time in the future that you need to spend less than you make in order to pay it back. It very quickly example cycle. Basically, you create a cycle. This is true of individual as it is for economy. This is why understanding credit is so important because it sets into motion mechanical, predictable, serious events happen in the future. This makes credit different from money. Money is what you settle transactions with. When you buy your beer for bartender with cash, the transaction is settled with immediately. But when you buy your beer with credit, it's not studied on bartender. You're saying a promise to pay in the future. Together, you and the bartender credit asset or liability. You just credit a credit out of thin air. It's not until you pay barter later that the asset and liability disappear, that goes away, and transactions settle. The reality, most of your people claim money is actually credit. The total amount credit in United States of $50 trillion, and the total amount of money is only about $3 trillion. Remember, in an economy without credit, the only way increases your spending is produce more. But in an economy with credit, you can also increase your spending by borrowing. As a result, an economy with credit has worth more spending and allows incomes to rise faster productivity over the short run. But not only on long run. Now don't get me wrong. Credit is necessarily something bad just causes cycles. It's bad when finances overconsumption can pay back. However, it's good when you efficiently allocate resources on produce income so you can pay back the debt. For example, if you borrow money by your big TV, doesn't generate income pay back the debt. But if you borrow money to, say, buy tractor, and that tractor let's harvest more crops and more money, then you can pay back the debt in a living standard. In an economy with credit, you can follow the transactions and see how credit grow. Let me give you an example. Suppose you earn $110,000 a year, have no debt. You are credit early enough to borrow $10,000, say on a credit card. So you can spend $110,000 even though only on $100,000. Since you are spending another person's income, someone is earning $110,000. The person earning $110,000 with no debt can borrow $11,000, so he can spend $101,000. Even though he's only on $110,000, he's spending this is another person's income, and by following the transactions, we can begin to see how this price works and a self-imposing pattern. But remember, borrowing created cycles. And if the cycles goes up, it eventually needs to come down. This leads into the short-term debt cycle. As economic activity increases with expansion, pursues the short-term debt cycle, spending continuously increases and some prices rise. This helps become to increase spending is fueled by credit, which can spend easily out of the air. When the amount spending is income propels the production of goods, prices rise. When prices rise, we call this inflation. The central bank doesn't want too much inflation because it causes problem. Seeing prices rise, it raises interest rates, but higher interest rates, fewer people can afford borrow money, and the cost of existing debt rise. Think about this as monthly payment to a credit card going up. Because people borrow less and higher daily payments, they have less money you have to spend. So spend slows. And one person's spending is on another person's income drop. And so on and so forth. When people are spending less, prices go down. We call this deflation. Economic activity decreases and we have a recession. If the recession is too severe, inflation no longer a problem. The central bank lower interest rates because of everything. With low interest rates, debt repayments reduce and borrowing spending pick up. Another expansion. As the economy works like a machine. In the short-term debt cycle, spending is constrained only by willingness of lenders and borrowers to provide and receive credit. When credit is easily available, there's an economic expansion. When credit isn't easily available, there's a recession. And note that this cycle controlled primarily by the central bank. The short-term debt cycle typically lasts 5 to 8 years and happens over and over again for a decade. But notice the bottom and top of each cycle finish with more growth previous cycle and with more credit debt. Why? Because people push it. They have inclination in borrowing, spend more instead of paying back the debt. It's human nature. Because this over long period of time, this rise faster income credit, long-term debt cycle. 영광이 가. Long debt in lenders even more worth expand credit. Why? Because everything seems going great. People just focus on what's been happening lately. And what's been happening lately? Incomes having rise, asset value going up. The stock market lose. It's a boom. It pays to buy goods, services, and financial assets with borrow money. When people do a lot of that, we call it bubble. So even though debt is growing, incomes having grown nearly expense to offset. Let's call the ratio debt to income the debt burden. So long as income continues to rise, the debt burden stays manageable. At the same time, asset value so on. People borrow huge amounts of money to buy asset investment, causing their response even higher. People feel wealthy. So even though can accumulate lots of debt, rising in asset value help borrowers remain creditworthy for a long time. But this obviously cannot continue forever, and it doesn't. Over decades, debt burden slowly increased, creating larger and larger debt repayments. At some point, debt repayments start going faster than income, forcing people to cut back on their spending. And if this one person's spending is another person's income, incomes begin to go down, which makes people less creditworthy, causing borrowing to go down. Debt repayments continue to rise, which makes spending drop even further. And the cycle reverses itself. This is the long-term debt peak. Debt burdens have simply become too big. For the United States, Europe, and much of the rest of the world, this happened in 2000. It happened in the same region, happened in Japan in 1989, and in the United States back in 1929. Now the economy begins deleveraging. In a deleveraging, people cut spending, income suffer, credit disappears, asset prices drop, banks get squeezed, the stock market crashes, social tension rise, and holding stocks spin out the other way. As income suffer and debt repayments rise, borrow gets squeezed. No longer creditworthy, credit dries up, and borrowers can no longer borrow enough. Scrambling to fill this hole, borrowers are forced to sell assets. The loss to sell assets floods the market at the same time as spending for. This is when the stock market collapses, the real estate market. Banks and banks get into trouble. As asset prices drop, the value of the collateral borrowers can put up drops. This makes borrowers even less credit worthy. People feel poor. Credit rapidly disappear. Less spending, less income, less wealth, less credit, less borrowing, and so on. It's a vicious cycle. This appears similar to a recession, but the difference here is that interest rates here can be lower to save the day in a recession. Lowering interest rates work to stimulate borrowing. However, in a deleveraging, lowering interest rates doesn't work because interest rates are already low and soon hit 0%. So the stimulation ends. Interest rates in the United States hit 0% during the deleveraging 1930s and again in 2008. The difference between a recession and a deleveraging is that in a deleveraging, borrowers' debt burdens have simply got too big and can be relieved by lowering interest rates. Lenders realize that the debt have become too large to ever be fully paid back. Borrowers have lost their ability to repay, and their collateral has lost value. They feel crippled by the debt. They don't even want more. Lenders stop lending, borrowers stop borrowing. Think of the economy as being not creditworthy, thus like an individual. So what do you do about it? But the problem is that burdens are too high and they must come down. There are 4 ways this can happen. 1. People, businesses, governments cut their spending. 2. That's reduced to defaults and restructuring. 3. Wealth is distributed from the haves to the have-nots. The finally 4. The central bank prints new money. These 4 ways have happened in every deleveraging in modern history. Usually spending is cut first. As you just saw, people, business, even governments tied in values cut their spending so that can pay down debt. This is often referred to as austerity. When borrowers stop taking on new debts and start paying down old debts, you might expect the debt burden to decrease. But the opposite happens because spending is cut and one man's spending is another man's income. It causes incomes to fall. Therefore, faster than debts are repaid and the debt burden actually gets worse. As we've seen, this cut in spending deflationary and painful. Businesses are forced to cut costs, which means less jobs and higher unemployment. This leads to the next step, that must reduce. Many borrowers find themselves unable to repay their loans, and a borrower's debt are the lender's asset. When a borrower doesn't repay the bank, people get nervous that the bank won't be able to repay them, so they lost to withdraw their money from the bank. Bank gets squeezed, and people, businesses, and banks default on their debt. This severe economic contraction is a depression. A big part of a depression is people discovering much of what they thought was their worth isn't really there. Let's go back to the bar. When you bought a beer and put it on a bar tab, you promised to repay bar tab. Your promise became the asset in the bar tab. But if you break the promise, if you want to pay in the back, the central floor on the bar tab, and the asset it had is really worth anything, it has basically disappeared. Many lenders don't want their asset to disappear and agree to debt restructuring. That restructuring, lenders get paid back less, or get paid back over a longer time frame, or at a lower interest rate, and then was somehow agreed. Somehow a contract is broken in a way that reduces that lenders would rather have a little of something than all of nothing. Even though that disappears, that restructuring causes income and asset value to disappear faster. So the debt burden continues to get worse. Right cutting spending debt reduction is also painful and deflationary. All of this impacts the central government because lower incomes and less employment means the government collects fewer taxes. At the same time, it needs to increase its spending because unemployment has risen. Many of the employed have inadequate saving or needs to financial support from the government. Additionally, governments create stimulus plans and increases their spending to make up for the decreases in the economy. Government's budget deficits explode in the leverage because they spend more than they earn in taxes. This is what's happening when you hear about the budget deficit on the news. To fund their deficit, governments need to either raise taxes or borrow money. But it incomes foreign, so many unemployed. Who is the money going to come from? The rich. Since governments do raise more money and since wealth is concentrated in the hands of a small percentage of the people, governments naturally raise taxes on the wealthy, which facilitates redistribution of wealth in the economy. From the haves, have-nots. The have-nots who are suffering begin to resent the wealth he has. The wealthy haves being squeezed by the weak economy, falling asset collections, and higher taxes, begin to resent have-nots. If the depression continues, social disorder can break out. Not only taxation, less incomes, they can also between countries, especially that are in credit countries. This situation leads to political change that can sometimes be explained. In the 1930s, it is led to Hitler coming to power more in Europe and deflation in the United States. Pressure reduces something and added depression increases. Remember, most of what people thought was money was actually credit. So when credit disappears, people don't have enough money. People disappear more for more money, and you remember who can print money? The central bank can. Having already lowered its interest rates to nearly zero, it proceeded to print money. Unlike current spending, debt reduction, and wealth redistribution, printing money is inflationary and stimulative. Inevitably, the central bank prints new money out of the air and uses it to buy financial assets and government bonds. It happened in the United States during the Great Depression, and then again in 2008. United States, the Federal Reserve printed over $2 trillion. Other central banks can allow around the world the cloud printed. It helps drive up asset prices, which makes people more creditworthy. However, this only helps those who own financial assets. You see, the central bank can print money, but it can only buy financial assets. The central government, on the other hand, can buy goods, services and put money in the hands of the people, but it can't print money. So in order to stimulate the economy, the two must cooperate by buying government bonds. The central bank essentially lends money to the government, allowing it to run a deficit and increases spending on goods and services through its stimulus programs and employment benefits. This increases people's income as well as the government's debt. However, it will lower the economy's total debt burden. This is a very risky time. Policymakers the balance the poor ways the debt burdens come down. The deflationary ways need to balance with the inflationary ways in order to maintain stability. If balanced correctly, there can be a beautiful deleveraging. As I say, you see, a deleveraging can be ugly or it can be beautiful. How can a deleveraging be beautiful? Even though a deleveraging is a difficult situation, handling a difficult situation in the best possible way beautiful way is better than the depth unbalanced exercise of the levelizing pace. In the beautiful deleveraging, debts decline relative to income. Real economic growth is positive, and inflation is still a problem. It is achieved by having the right balance. The right balance requires a certain mix of cutting spending, reducing debt, transferring wealth, and printing money so that economic and social stability can be maintained. People ask if printing money will raise inflation. If it's offset foreign credit, remember spending is what matters. $1 of spending paid for with money has the same effect on price as $1 of spending paid for with credit. By printing money, the central bank can make up for the disappearance of credit, which increases in the amount of money. In order to turn things around, the central bank needs to not only pump up income growth, but get the rate of income growth higher than the rate of interest on the accumulated debt. So what do I mean by that? Basically, income needs to grow faster than debt growth. For example, let's assume that the country going through the leveraging has a debt to income ratio of 110%. That means that the amount of debt it has is same as the amount of income. And then country makes in a year now think about the interest rate of that. Let's say it's 2%. If that is growing at 2%, because of that interest rate and income is only growing at around 1%, you will never reduce the debt burden. You need to print enough money to get the rate of income. However, printing money could easily be abused because it's so easy to do and people prepare it to the alternatives. The key is avoid printing too much money and causing a substantially high inflation the way Germany did during its deleveraging in the 1920s. It fails to make achieve the right balance of deleveraging is so dramatic. Growth is slow, but the burdens go down. That's a beautiful deleveraging. When incomes begin to rise, borrow begin to repair more creditworthy. And when borrow repair creditworthy, lenders begin to lend money again. Debt burdens finally begin to fall. Be able to money, people can spend more. Eventually, the economy begins to grow again, leading to the inflation and the long-term debt cycle. Though the deleveraging process can be horrible if handled badly, if handled well, it will eventually fix the problem. It takes roughly a decade or more per decade debt burdens to fall and economic activity to get back to normal, hence the term team lost decade in closing. Of course, the economy is a little bit more complicated than this template suggests. However, laying the short-term debt cycle on top of the long-term debt cycle and then laying both of them on top of the productivity growth line gives us a reasonably good template for seeing where we've been, where we are now, and where we are so probably headed. Is somewhere there are 3 rules of thumb away from this first. Don't have debt rise faster than income, because debt burdens eventually crush. Second, don't have the income rise faster than productivity, because you will eventually become uncomparable. And third, do all that you can to raise your productivity, because in the long run that's what matters most. This is a simple advice for you, and it's a simple advice for policymaker. You might be surprised, but most people, including most policymakers, don't pay enough attention to this. This template has worked for me, and if it worked for you, thank you.